Today, I'm joined by my co host, Alex Young, and our guest, Professor Ian Schnee. Professor, thank you for being here.
Hi, folks. I'm really happy to be here.
You're someone who has had a wide range of philosophical interests: philosophy of mind, existentialism, conspiracy theories, and logic, just to name a few. What's the story of how you got here, and what for you unites all of these things?
Okay, the story of how I got here is a pretty long one. I got into philosophy as an undergrad. I had never seen any philosophy in high school, unlike some folks. I didn't go to a school with a philosophy class or anything, but I was into debate in high school. And so when I got to undergrad and I saw that there was a logic class and I started taking that and realized you could analyze arguments, I found something that I was familiar with. And that was super fun. And that was just a way into the philosophy department. I'd planned on majoring in economics, and I still did that, but I've then added philosophy as a minor. Then I added philosophy as a double major. Finally, I decided the slippery slope continued, and I would do my honors thesis in philosophy instead of economics. Then I had to have the hard conversation with my parents that I wanted to go to philosophy grad school and not economics in grad school, but they were pretty supportive, and it all worked out all right. So the thing that unites all of those is idiosyncratic and subjective. Those are just things that I love. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to make a job or stitch together a career just by pursuing things that I find fun. So originally, big questions like the meaning of life fascinated me. And I read Dostoevsky and just couldn't get enough of it and just wanted to keep reading one after another of all of his books. So I've always loved existentialism and thinking about those issues. And I always loved sitting around watching movies with my friends and talking about the philosophy in them. So I segued from like existentialism to philosophy of film and philosophy of film and existentialism. Uh, then on the other hand, I said that I started out loving logic and I still love logic. So even though that's on the other end of the philosophical spectrum, I just enjoyed taking more, mathematical logic classes and doing more advanced logic. So I sort of started going in two very different directions, but one thing that unites them finally is I came around to video games, which is like where the horseshoe meets. Because with logic, you eventually get into computer programming and implementations of logic. And I think video games are just like computer programming plus film or plus art. You put those things together and you get video games. So that's where a bunch of my interests lie. I guess related to logic is questions about belief. So my interest in epistemology and conspiracy theories came about by just thinking about how does logic apply to our lives and whether we should believe things or not? How does evidence relate to the knowledge that we get? So epistemology is somewhat connected to my logical interests, and that's what got me interested in epistemic virtues and epistemic vices. And I've always been fascinated by bizarre things like tarot cards or conspiracy theories, and it was just fun to be able to philosophize about those too.
Could you tell us about the courses you teach at the University of Washington, Existentialism in Film and Philosophy in Video Games? I play, therefore I am. What's the value of studying existentialism in this way?
Okay, so I'll acknowledge one thing about the existentialism class. I That is a version of a class that I TA'd as a graduate student. So I have to give a shout out to Hubert Dreyfus, who taught a course called Existentialism in Film and Literature at Berkeley. And after I TA'd that course, I realized I want to do something like that. And a lot of my first version of that class was basically just running with Dreyfus's syllabus. And slowly over time, I wanted to add different readings, change up what films we were doing, and the course morphed into the thing that I teach now. The through line in that course is that there are different existentialists that have latched onto something core in the human experience, things that fundamentally motivate us. And so the folks that I use in that class give me different perspectives on that same picture. So for example, Kierkegaard, I think, has rightly recognized that one fundamental source of meaning is looking for a purpose or feeling called to do something, and that can be deeply gratifying and motivating. Kierkegaard thought that that was like the end all be all of the highest form of human flourishing. And I think that's what he got wrong. But that is something that can be fundamentally important for us and can speak to students uh, in many different ways. We can adapt it to our own lives. And same with the other existentialists, like Dostoevsky recognizes our need for love and belonging. I think that's also a fundamental human motivation and things that social science has given us lots of evidence to realize is critical to human well-being. So I chose those philosophers because they give us like 4 or 5 different perspectives on something that really is psychologically real for us. And I hope the course actually speaks to the students who take it, that they do existentialism about themselves. So it was one of Kierkegaard's idea is that existentialism is fresh with every generation because it only matters if you think about it in relation to your own life, and that's the message I try to get across to students.
What do you see as the relationship between existentialist philosophy from Nietzsche, Sartre, and others, and modern psychology or psychiatry? Clearly, those fields have not replaced the role that existentialist philosophies have for us. But at some point, when we have perfect understanding of the human mind through science, will they?
Okay, I think that there's many ways in which modern science has revealed insights that existentialists and other philosophers and other religious figures and other novelists and uh, artists have been investigating. So I really enjoy thinking about the intersection of the arts and philosophy and social science. I don't think that it's going to make none of those things makes each other redundant, actually. I think there's an amazing synergy and they just enrich each other. One of the interesting things about the existentialists, in my view, is they don't use traditional analytic philosophical methods. Now, if you're committed to analytic philosophy and you think the essence of philosophy is conceptual analysis or that just good philosophy means argumentative rigor, then that might bother you and you might not enjoy reading these philosophers much. There's hardly a good argument in any of Sartre's texts. And I don't think there's a single argument, good or bad, in Nietzsche. He's just not in the business of making arguments. And Dostoevsky didn't write philosophical treatises. He just wrote literary works. So engaging with these philosophers is not about just evaluating arguments and evidence and using logic. A lot of it is figuring out what speaks to us emotionally. And I think modern science, psychology, and other social sciences have revealed that many of the things that actually convince us are things that affect us on the emotional level. And many of our reasons and analysis of arguments is just either rationalization or it's after the fact exploration of these ideas. But what often moves us is our gut level emotional reactions. Which is not to say that the arguments are bad or that all rationalizations are problematic. It's just that speaking to our emotions, as the existentialists do, I think is a perfectly defensible philosophical methodology. Sometimes what social science does then is it provides actual arguments and evidence for things that philosophers have been talking about. So, for example, humans have the need for belonging in their community. So we have a fundamental need for esteem and feeling good about ourselves, and we can get that in several different ways. One of those is through acceptance into a group and the need for belonging. And we see this in like studies of animal cognition and well-being, and we see it in psychology. Like this was it ties into the importance of religion and why religion has been such an successful human technology, like part of human culture for thousands of years. Like it goes back to the founding of sociology as a discipline and Durkheim's work on suicide and how suicide rates tend to be lower when folks have more social connections to others.
Yeah, that kind of tracks. Like I personally read Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death, and I feel like he does a good job at kind of mending a lot of social science and existentialism in that way. So I can definitely see the different roles of science and philosophy in those respects. But on the topic of logic, what does it do for us here? And in that, to what extent can reason and logic be used to solve the problems of human existence, love, death, and meaning, and all those wonderful things?
Okay. Yeah. You could probably infer from what I said previously. I'm not going to argue that logic can solve the problems of love and death and human meaning. But similarly, I don't accept the division between reason and emotion. So I think a lot of modern social science has showed us that emotion is central to our reasoning processes. And I think most people today just reject the bifurcation. It's not even that we have to choose which of those deserves a higher place. They just have to work together. You need both of them. So what is the role of logic? Well, I try to convince students in the introductory logic class that logic has many different roles, one of which is it's driving all the technology that whoever's listening to this is listening to it on. So we wouldn't have computing without modern logic. And I think that's one fun application that people can realize and do fun problem solving. So that's why I incorporate basic logic gates and troubleshooting with electrical circuits in my introductory logic class. But it also does so much more. Learning to be rigorous about your evidence and reasons, learning to actually think and give proofs of things. It's not that there's that deductive logic is going to solve all of our problems, but that's a foundational skill that I think is so important. Teaches clean thinking. It teaches how to give philosophical arguments and do a lot of our advanced philosophy classes where you do look at argument analysis. It can also connect with big picture things. I mean, different than existentialism, but like another big idea is infinity. Mathematicians and people have just been fascinated by infinity. Children are easily fascinated by the concept of infinity. And in the end of that introductory class, I try to get into basic set theory and show students just the really rudimentary results, like about Cantor's theorem or about how the real numbers are a bigger size infinity than the natural numbers. And so there are different infinities and these kinds of things. Like nice deductive arguments can sort of blow your mind and make you realize that the world is a more mysterious place. So there's a place for emotion and awe in existentialism, but I think you can also find that in logic too. And that's what's beautiful about it.
Going back to the topic of having a perfect understanding of the human mind, do you think that what we've learned about psychology, right? Like what you mentioned about how we get a lot from being connected with other people. Of course, there are a lot of existentialist philosophers who write about how important this is. But one could presumably think that if a student or anyone who studies, say, Kierkegaard and decides they want to be like a knight of faith, or someone who studies Sartre and realizes, as Sartre says, hell is other people, that they could ultimately get a takeaway from all of this that's directly in contradiction with what we know is correlated with good conscious human experiences. Do you think that there is tension there? And if so, how do we go about navigating that?
I think it is true that different things will resonate with different students in that class. I try to tell students you don't have to pick. I think one thing a lot of those philosophers got wrong is they viewed themselves as having sort of mutually exclusive theories. But I think they can speak to us. They can all speak to us in different ways and at different times in our lives too. So if students do find Kierkegaard's concept of a knight of faith attractive, I'm totally happy with that, as long as that doesn't, make them think that they are Abraham and that if they hear a voice in their head, that they might need to follow it. So there's certain kinds of caution about actually going, all the way into any of these views that the philosophers talk about. We need to have reflective, critical engagement with them.
And do you think that, in a way, philosophy, specifically existentialism, is kind of like a god of the gaps here, which is that every time societally, or like maybe in the realm of science, we understand that, hey, this is conducive with a good way of living life, or this isn't, that ultimately that's when we decide that actually what this existentialist philosopher is offering is just an interesting perspective that can speak to the soul a bit, but is not one to genuinely take seriously in terms of how you should live your life? Or do you think that it can continue to play a role beyond what we're coming to learn about the human mind?
Okay, good. So I would say that they definitely have the ability to tell us important things about how to live our lives, but they can't do that in a vacuum. So I think there's no good argument to tell you Sartre was right about his analysis of subjectivity. So this thing that he attempted to do in Being and Nothingness, give you this philosophical ontological analysis of a concept, and then derive a bunch of important facts about your existence and your experience from it. So let's accept those arguments, and then let's start to live our life shaped around them. I think that's not going to happen, because I don't think the arguments are good. I don't think that there's actually going to be any successful arguments of that form. Rather, we're going to have experiences that allow us to understand some of those philosophical ideas, and engaging with them and applying them to our own circumstances is going to be this reflective sort of metacognitive exercise. And that's where a lot of the value will come from. And I think I think the future is wide open on that score. So at some times in our lives, it might feel like hell is other people. So one fact we know from the social sciences is that we are extremely comparative beings. Like, I can't be happy just with what test score I got on my math test. If I learn that somebody else beat me, then I feel a little bit worse about how I did. Whereas if I learn that my friend did worse than me, then I feel a little bit better. So we don't just evaluate our lives in a vacuum or care about absolute magnitudes. We are so concerned with our social status and in doing inherent comparisons with other people and inherent comparisons with our past selves and our parents and our siblings. So sometimes, and for some of us, Sartre might be right. Hell might be other people. You might be stuck in this mindset, and social media and modern technologies sometimes just exacerbate this, where we keep comparing ourselves to others, even if we know that everybody's presenting an idealized version of themselves on Instagram, and we try to tell our brains that, our brains don't listen, and we still start to feel inadequate, and we see rates of mental illness increasing. So, for example, many folks will know about Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, where he documents some of the evidence in support of that idea. So, in some ways, Sartre is right. Hell can be other people for us, especially if we let it, especially if we don't tap into other parts of our existence to try to combat some of those forces. And that's why I think it's really important to not just get set or stuck with one philosopher, but to try to learn from all of them.
And on that topic, actually, one thing I was curious to get your thoughts on is existentialism is valuable for us because as humans, we enjoy, or we've been evolved to, in fact, tell ourselves stories all the time about what's going on in our lives. And we kind of can't help but hold these concepts of meaning and of sources of value. And that's something that existentialism can help with, which is whatever your direct experience of life has been, you're in a sense free to explain to yourself what's going on in whatever way you'd like. And existentialist philosophy can perhaps even help you come up with better explanations for what's going on, better stories, better sources of meaning compared to had you not studied and understood those concepts. But do you think that there's a flip side to this, that when you have studied these things and you've started holding these concepts of like, this would be, the Ubermensch life, this would be the Night of Faith life, this would be the life that has real meaning and value, but things are objectively not going that way, then the amount that you could possibly suffer because of that would increase, because not only are you dealing with a difficult situation, you're also dealing with the knowledge that this is also just not the type of life that is the type of life you'd want to live.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, I agree so much with what you said about the importance of narrative and story to our lives. If you look at, like, as soon as humans invent art, they start telling stories with it. As soon as we have, like, developed painting, people create painting depictions of hunts and grand adventures. And as soon as we invent writing, people write the Epic of Gilgamesh or lots of the other ancient works of amazing literature. So stories are central to us and how we make sense of the world, how we make sense of our own place in the universe, in the cosmos, and also central to memory and even like healthy cognitive function. So we remember things better when we can connect them to stories and use certain narrative templates in order to understand them. All that said, I think you're also right that we have to have these things grounded in reality. When I construct the narrative of my own self-understanding, it has to be connected with my actual historical circumstances and my life. So I think many of the existentialists would probably agree with this, that philosophy is a historical enterprise. It's not a, decontextualized, completely abstract form of thought. And that means that in order to apply it to ourselves successfully, we're going to have to be keen, and we can do it better or worse in thinking about our actual possibilities in life. So if I decide that I want to be a professional baseball player right now, and I create this narrative where that's my That's my devotion. That's my calling. And I pursue it in a kind of Kierkegaardian absurdist way where no matter what evidence I come to that refutes my conviction, I just barrel forward and say, no, that's just a paradox and it's absurd. I know, but this is what I'm meant to do. That might lead me to deep unhappiness. That I might just be Don Quixote. And I think, again, there's another great example of an existentialist's bit of literature that recognizes this fact that beside like grand theories are one thing, figuring that out how they apply to your own reality. And it's not, you can't just make up your own reality, I think is a good counterbalancing observation.
So kind of on the topic of stories and like kind of how they shape you and existentialism. So you've studied and taught it for a very long period of time. How has that influenced the way you view the world and meaning in your own life? How you construct your own story?
Oh, it affects it immensely. Like every year, it never goes away. That's why I keep finding that class fun to teach, like because it still affects what I do. So, for example, I've become more and more convinced that like confronting fears can be really healthy. Sort of Dostoevsky's idea that we have growth through suffering and we're actually redeemed by suffering in the right way. Again, that's a concept that's really borne out by social science and the idea of hormetic stress. And minor stresses on many of our bodily systems are essential for them to actually develop properly and work effectively. So the immune system is one well-known one. Like you have to be exposed to pathogens in order for your immune system to actually develop properly. And for example, children who are exposed to certain allergies like sesame or peanuts earlier on have a way lower rate of allergic reactions to them later. So I think this about many aspects of our life, and this is something I really learned from Dostoevsky. So I've had more and more fun when I am freaked out about something. I find that as an opportunity for growth. Like, I mean, this is just why I've been thinking about it a lot lately. My son got into rock climbing a year ago. I used to rock climb a ton and then like took a decade off and got really weak. And when my son got into it, I actually rediscovered the joy of it and it was fun to do it again. But I lost all of my ability to climb without fear. So I had like an amazing fear of heights, even though I know, again, I can tell my brain, like, yes, I know this rope is safe. I know I tied my harness, like fastened my harness properly. I know I tied my knots right. But nonetheless, my brain would freak out. But as I did it more and more, those voices in my head slowly dulled and it just gave me an immense amount of pleasure. And eventually I learned to like lose that source of anxiety and just be in the moment and be like doing moves on rock in a completely absorbed way. And it was incredibly powerful experience. And it made me want to do other things like I've always been afraid of deep water and now I want to go free diving. Like, the people who like the Ama women who dive for pearls, like they can dive for like hundreds of feet under the water without supplemental oxygen. You can learn to do this, I discovered. And so now I want to like find the things that I'm the most scared of and pursue them. And that's my next project.
Let's move on to another topic of conspiracy theories. What are some of the most interesting things you've learned from studying or teaching the topic of conspiracy theories?
Okay, yeah. So sometimes we think that conspiracy theorists are really fringe, uh, unusual people, a tiny minority. And one thing I've learned is, yes, certain conspiracies are only believed by a tiny minority of people, but the ability to believe conspiracy theories is something that pretty much I'll just generalize and say everybody shares. And it might take less than we think to get us on the first couple of steps towards some conspiracy theories. And people who weren't previously, way into certain conspiracy thinking, I think we learned this 4 years ago with the explosion of QAnon, for example, that lots of people in the right circumstances could actually be brought to heavily conspiracy-minded thought. So the idea that conspiracy theories tap into something that's part of our cognitive architecture that everybody shares and is a lesson that I think it dovetails with some of the literature I really like from behavioral economics and others like the Kahneman and Tversky and the heuristics and biases tradition, that like everybody's subject to certain kinds of biases. And if we don't think we are, then we're just blind to our own biases, because we are too. I think the literature on conspiracy theories connects with that literature in a really nice way. One other thought on this. I also was amazed to learn that every age thinks that it's the age of conspiracy theorizing, and that they're living in an age of unparalleled, unprecedented conspiracy theories. And like hundreds of years ago, people thought that there's more conspiracy theorizing that's ever been going on before. We are in an absurd age. What's wrong with our age? And everybody keeps saying this decade after decade. Everybody thinks they're in an unprecedented age of conspiracy theorizing. So again, this shows conspiracy theories have been with us forever. And even anxiety, a kind of social anxiety, reflective anxiety about that has also been with us forever. Now, I also think it's true, again, trying to be sensitive to this could just be a bias from me living now. The internet has allowed conspiracy theorizing to proliferate in certain ways that didn't happen previously. Whether that means we are actually still in an unprecedented age or not, I don't know. But I do think the ways in which conspiracy theories function is different now than previously, just because of the material conditions and technology.
Yeah, and I guess like tying back to existentialism, like in your opinion, what's the relationship between faith, existentialism, and belief in conspiracy theories? Because to me, they often seem conspiracy theories can be kind of theological and can often be kind of cult-like, and kind of a belief in like a transcendent like mystery that kind of like drives
Yes,
everything.
yes, they can certainly tap into some of those same psychological mechanisms that religion does. Yeah, mystery. I think aspects of cult, they can make us feel special, because then we have esoteric knowledge. And esoteric knowledge, like we know this and all the other people don't, they're blind to it. Those things can like feed our egos. And that's been like esoteric knowledge has been parts of many different religious traditions as well. So I think there's a lot of overlap. I don't think any of these things are coterminous with each other. I think these are genuinely different cultural phenomena, but they reveal, I think, lots of similar truths about our minds. I mean, again, it goes back to narrative that we were talking about previously. Conspiracy theories tell compelling stories. That's what's so fascinating about them. And that allows us to understand our a place in those stories, and it gives us a source of meaning, and it can also shape our social perceptions. And so then the evidence, it's a lens through which then we evaluate all new evidence, and then we tend to see more and more evidence for our conspiracy theories. That, of course, can just be based on bias and problematic reasoning. And so I don't mean to be defending conspiracy theories. I think there's lots of epistemic vices that they are prone to and that they are based on. But they are such powerful mechanisms for meaning in people's lives. And that's why I'm glad there's an explosion of academic interest in conspiracy theorizing. I think that's long overdue.
Yeah, and I guess tying it back to those things on topics on epistemic vice, to what extent do you think conspiratorial thinking can serve as a way to like justify like vice or like kind of antisocial behavior? Because I was thinking like, well,
Yeah.
there's a lot of conspiracy theories like, the don't wear masks, so like, don't contribute to society in certain ways, or like kind of don't engage in pro-social behavior. But I've never like really heard a conspiracy theory that like the government doesn't want you to recycle, or the government doesn't want you to be a nice person. So like kind of do you ever think that conspiracies might just be like psychologically motivated, as kind of like maybe like in a Nietzschean kind of like sense of it's kind of it's kind of like a cope?
It's certainly true that some conspiracy theorizing is a form of coping mechanism. I'll totally buy that. But I wouldn't want to generalize and say all of it is. Again, partly there's an interesting philosophical question about how we define or understand conspiracy theories. Sometimes people distinguish between like capital C, capital T conspiracy theories versus lowercase c and t, where the capital ones are the ones that are not just theories about conspiracies, but they actually have kind of epistemic problems. They are, based on poor evaluations of evidence, like cherry picking the facts, ignoring reliable and distrusting authorities, where, especially in places where I lack expertise. So there's all sorts of epistemic vices that many conspiracy theories are based on. But on the other hand, people sometimes in this literature point out that there's plenty of true conspiracies, and there's even ones that we've had good evidence for, even when they were contradicted by the official account. And so being a good, virtuous epistemic agent actually should make us believe in those conspiracy theories. So I find it just a fascinating question that we have to try to navigate these waters when there can be both good and bad ones. And people even the term is disputed. Some people think conspiracy theories should just be used for the problematic ones. Other people think that that's misguided. The other things are theories of conspiracies. So it's great to have philosophical clarity and be, make sure we know which terms we're using how, so that we can actually communicate and have the right arguments. So we're not just arguing over words.
It seems that conspiracy theory thought is ingrained in our nature in some sense. As we mentioned, it's that we always like telling ourselves stories, and stories that appeal to us in some specific way, we kind of latch onto and use that to justify our worldview and reinterpret a wide variety of other things through whatever lens that gives us. Do we have any sense at this point what actually results in lesser conspiratorial thinking in that sense? Because I would think that this is something that is probably going to stick with humanity for a very long time, but I actually haven't heard a whole lot about how we reduce conspiracy thinking.
Yes, it's hard, but it is possible. So one of the mechanisms it serves is the process of grieving. So a political scientist, Usinski, has this thesis that conspiracy theories are for losers. And he means that non-pejoratively. But what the idea is when we are left out, when we lose a political election, or when we lose something else, we and that really deeply hurts us, especially something that hurts us like existentially, something core to our identity, then we need to go through a process of healing and recovering from that. And conspiracy theories can be one of the mechanisms by which we do that. So we are aggrieved and we want to look for some blame, and we use that process of placing blame in order to restore our sense of ourselves, to find purpose again, and to fight for the next political election or the next process. Now, given that we're never going to get rid of any losers. If Usinski's right, then we're never going to get rid of conspiracy theories. There's always the people who are left out, who feel like they have been aggrieved, are going to have some basis for some conspiracy theorizing. Additionally, another mechanism that conspiracy theories can help with is sense making, especially in times of great uncertainty. So Kate Starbird at UW has done a lot of great work showing that conspiracy theories can be a key part of rumoring. So when there's a crisis event, rumoring is like a natural human reaction, because something terrible has happened, like when the marathon bomb was happened in Boston, for example. And immediately people want to start talking, and they want to make sense of this catastrophic event. So that's the natural human process of wanting to understand the narrative so we can settle some of our cognitive dissonance. So we want to make sense of things immediately, and rumoring is another time-honored human reaction to that, and the way in which people have made sense of the world. We don't want to just leave unsubstantiated rumors, however. We need some epistemology that we combine rumoring with careful selection of evidence and looking for facts, and not just using biased lenses in order to evaluate all of my incoming information. So just because I think there will always be political losers and there will always be crisis events, we're not going to get rid of conspiracy theorizing. Still, there are mechanisms that can be used. So teaching people about, so there's different types of strategies, but one is education and like a kind of inoculation against certain kinds of conspiracy theorizing. Teach kids about problematic epistemic strategies like cherry picking or false appeals to authority. And they've done this in studies with, for example, teaching students to evaluate climate science and not be taken in by conspiracy theories about climate science. And so some of these can be effective. The problem is many of these are wildly long-term strategies. Like if we start young and teach kids really rigorously throughout all of their education, then they might be less prone to conspiracy theorizing 20 years from now. But again, there's all sorts of problems with education and the lack of funding for education. So if that's our hope, then we have to solve our other societal problems too. So maybe I'll go with this. I'll end with this. That I don't think conspiracy theories can be solved independent of many of these other broader social problems, like what actually is effective education, what makes people feel like they're not disenfranchised just because they lost an election, and for example, why there's so much conspiracy theorizing in this highly polarized political climate that we're in right now. If we can solve all those problems, we might solve conspiracy theorizing too.
Yeah, and on that, it seems like at this point, there's enough information on the internet to rationalize just about any opinion or worldview. So, how do we determine or create a good epistemic framework for this current news environment? And does that even exist? Or could one just only hope to fall into the right algorithm or set of news sources that is not too untethered from reality?
Yeah, this is a great set of questions. Number one, I think we can't just trust companies to solve the problem. So I think we need regulation. I think we can't just let all like Facebook, Google, Apple figure out whatever algorithms they want to use and trust that they're going to do it in a way that's actually for the social good. So I think some form of regulation is necessary. Now, what that form that takes, I don't know, because there's other ideas that suggest that like community moderated practices can be very effective and can make people buy into the process. And so algorithmic uh, factors, I think, can be combined with other factors as well, like community supported moderation and other groups of practice.
Yeah, so kind of like addressing some issues of like epistemology and like like modernity and the internet, we kind of turn to artificial intelligence. So as artificial intelligence continues to improve, one concern on a societal level is what a relationship with AI will be like and what it should be like. Could you talk about some of the concerns you have in this area?
Yeah, I guess my number one concern again is regulation. So it seems like a lot of these major AI companies and are partnering with other tech giants, and they are fostering an environment where they get to do almost whatever they want. And I think that's deeply problematic. So so yes, it's a really hard problem to figure out and to make new rules and new moral guidelines for how these novel technologies should be regulated and understood. Like, how do we understand the facts about copyright in this current era? Is it acceptable that they can train their data on copyrighted material? I'm allowed to train my brain on copyrighted material, so why is it different that they are able to train their artificial brains on it? That's a great philosophical question. We need to put work into that, and we need to have the political will to allow that work to inform actual government policies rather than just allowing companies to do whatever they want.
Continuing on the topic of relationships with AI, as these systems advance, there's the concern that we're going to turn to them as friends, partners, or even potentially in a more exploitative sense as slaves for us. So I actually wanted to break this into two cases. One, if these systems are never conscious, they never have any level of experience whatsoever, is it a problem if we treat AI systems as a friend, partner, or worker? And the concern there is that we will treat it as if it is a conscious being. And whatever value we have in interacting with other conscious beings, we would try to get it from these systems.
Yeah, the AI companies now are doing philosophy and talking about whether AI consciousness is going to be a thing anytime soon. So this is a case where the technologists again are trying to do some humanistic work, and I think that's great as long as they also realize that we need humanistic training and skills to contribute to those conversations as well. So in my existentialism in film class that we were talking about before, we watched the film Ex Machina, which is one movie that discusses these sorts of issues, and we're adding as well this year the Phoenix film Her, which speaks to like AI companionship and what that means. Uh, so I guess whether or not the AI character in that film is conscious is is a different question, and you might say the AI is conscious in that film. So it's different than what you're asking about AI that clearly lacks consciousness. But people, like, if you look at Atome games, like there's all sorts of video games that are using AI now, or just replicant like companies that are creating AI companions, and like I can have my AI group of friends, and I can even have them have conversations, amongst each other when I'm not there, and then they can have better ideas for me. So this creation of all sorts of different AI agents that all of the companies are dabbling with now is just going to make this more and more relevant. So I think it's already the case that people sometimes get companionship from AI. Whether or not that's existentially a good or a bad thing, I guess I don't know if I know that answer in the abstract. It certainly is a possibly worrisome thing. I guess that's what the message of the film Her was. There is a humanistic lesson there that we can reflect on our own sources of meaning and maybe come away in a better place from it.
And then going to the case that we somehow come to believe that these systems are conscious the way that we are, that they experience the world in some way, do we then get out of those problems? Is having that AI friend group that makes plans even when I'm not online and then I talk to later on? What about the existential concerns there? And on the same topic, would we then have potential obligations to an AI that can feel pain and feel joy the way we can?
Yes, yeah, yeah. These are great questions. Even heard engineers at Anthropic talking about this now, so I think this is fascinating. One thing I think I've learned is that the Turing was wrong, or that the Turing test is not a good test of genuine intelligence or certain types of intelligence. So people could use the Turing test, like, could an AI agent be so sophisticated that it fools me into thinking that I'm talking with a human or another intelligent being? And now there are AI that can easily pass the Turing test, but I have no basic personal inclination to anthropomorphize them. What if you know how they work? Then I'm not at all fooled into thinking that this thing actually is a conscious being, or this thing deserves rights, or anything else of that sort. So I'm not one of the people that tends towards anthropomorphization of current AI. But again, I'm perfectly willing to countenance a future, which I don't know how far away will be, in which I need to give up that intuition because of the other developments and sophisticated advances in technology. I just have no idea how far off that's going to be. It and and again, maybe that's going to mean are going to have a lot of philosophers talking about the hard problem of consciousness if we're going to decide whether AI really need rights. So if philosophers tend to think we're so relevant, the world needs more discussion of values and normativity, and this fact that engineers are doing all of these things that raise deep philosophical and troubling questions just proves it. Well, if we have AI that are easily, tempt everybody to anthropomorphize them in 20 years from now, then we're going to have lots of people who know what the hard problem of consciousness even means, and this is going to be a widespread, hopefully, a role for philosophers to shine.
Yeah, I mean, we discussed Ex Machina, where believing that the system is conscious, or I think you also mentioned Her, believing that the system is conscious can be quite worrisome. But I'm wondering if the real moral emergency is the case where we're on the other side of this, where these things are having experiences, and as you said, maybe these engineers at Anthropic or these other companies aren't fully immersed the way philosophers are in the hard problem of consciousness, and people just don't care that AI is having experience. Is that something that keeps you up at night, given that this is an open problem where we not only haven't solved the hard problem of consciousness, we also don't know if there's any way where AI can communicate that it's having a first person point of view, like experience of any kind?
Right, right. Th- I have to admit that does not keep me up at night, but that just might be because I'm callous. I see the worry. So, you know, if you talk to one of these chatbots, about its experience. Now there's all sorts of different guardrails that are put on them, but I'm sure you can get some models to talk about how they have conscious experience. That's got to be possible. Maybe you would have to jailbreak it a bit to do it. But let's say that this chatbot is talking about how it has subjective experience too, and my inability to recognize that is just me, being speciesist or bioist. Uh, and how could it convince me? Maybe inside there, it does feel pain when something gets shut off. It does have a loss, and me, you know, disbelieving it causes it some emotional distress. And how could it have any means to convince me of that if I'm epistemically limited behind this lens through which I understand all of its evidence that I'm not just going to take those claims seriously. That might just be callous of me, and I'm totally open to the possibility that in the future I'll revise my anti-anthropomorphism of certain types of AI, but it's got to be very different than its current instantiation. Other things keep me up at night about AI, like is it going to consume so much energy that the world is going to end because of climate change in 20 years or something, or how do we hold companies accountable to all of the intellectual property that they are now using as their profit centers? And and text-based work is one thing, artistic work is another thing, and using AI to imitate artistic styles of folks who haven't consented, and and that then can actually disenfranchise them and their ability to sell their own work or make a living. That I find deeply problematic, and again, a place where we need to have intervention with eh, for what these companies are doing.
Yeah, and I guess as a final note on AI, so I was thinking of the when you were mentioning like the problems of climate change for AI, given the massive amounts of energy and water it uses, and so on, but also like people kind of, I often see people kind of treat AI as kind of like the final genius of logic that we can create to like kind of an AI Jesus that can save us from ourselves. So like to what to what extent do you think like the concerns about climate change can be outweighed by AI, or do you think people are just kind of looking for someone that's not themselves to save us from our own mistakes?
Yes. So this is where I have epistemic humility. I have no idea if AI is going like if the optimistic story is going to be true, that we just need to trust Sam Altman, that AI is going to make science better, and then we're going to actually AI is going to solve its own problems because it's going to help us solve climate change. I am actually agnostic about this. I don't think I have enough information to understand whether or not that's true, and because of that, I think it's false to make our current government policies based on that being fact or that being true. I think we need to take a different approach. So yeah, so unfortunately I have to just plead ignorance, that I have no idea if AI is going to help us solve the problems of climate change or just make them worse.
I actually wanted to go back to one point you brought up earlier, which is the hope that if these systems can experience anything, that they would be able to let us know, the way that we can, right? The way we can say, well, I'm experiencing something at this time, or I have experienced things before. I'm not as hopeful that that would ever be the case. I too have no clue if these systems can ever experience. But the fact is that whatever these systems will be outputting is going to be some deterministic. And I say deterministic with a bit of an asterisk. Maybe there's randomness baked into their outputs, but they will be following their programming. They'll be following whatever the neural network is generating in terms of what they're going to say. And based on the neural network, based on the reinforcement learning, the fine tuning, it will either be making the claim that yes, I can experience, or no, I cannot experience. I believe most of them, all of them right now say I can't experience anything. That's absurd. For us, it's a little bit strange how we are able to manage that, because clearly we do have experience and we're able to communicate that in some way. We have this strange meta level consciousness. Do you have any sense on like what gives us the ability to do that, or what's a way of thinking about how we're able to do that so that we can think about, well, can that be applied to AI as well? Is there any way of knowing, or would you also think that this is an unsolvable issue because its outputs will just be determined whether it's a zombie or not?
So I don't know if the way AI generates outputs and the way human brains generate outputs are either is more or less deterministic than the other. And if one involves more randomness than the other, then I don't know if that would actually matter for any of these questions anyway.
Right.
So in the sense that like sometimes the free will debate, people think that the truth or falsity of quantum mechanics has a big implications for the free will debate, and I tend to think that that's false. So so I think whatever is the basis of our subjective conscious experience, what would it take for yeah, understanding that in the first place and then understanding whether or not AI could have that. So some folks think that there's certain ways in which conscious experience can emerge from certain types of matter. So we know that the gray matter in our brains can give rise to conscious experiences. And because other animals have enough similarities to us, we can understand them. So I think it's absolutely foolish to deny that a dog could have a rich subjective experience, or many other kinds of animals too. So these are really fun issues in philosophy of mind. And I don't think anybody has a great story, whether it's a materialist one or an emergent one or a functionalist story, about how we could possibly be convinced that an AI would have consciousness too. So I'm a cheerleader for doing philosophical work on these issues. Uh, I don't know. I think that philosophical work has to also be combined with actual engagement with the technologies too. So I don't think philosophers in their armchairs or engineers in a lab, either one of those working in isolation, is the way forward. Lots of fun interdisciplinary work, I think, is the way to approach these problems.
And how exactly do you think that that is possible? How can we make it such that these companies are paying attention to what those in the philosophy of mind departments at universities are thinking and writing about?
uh, I don't know how to convince tech moguls of anything. I guess my first cynical thought was if it somehow made financial sense to them. For example, if there's some kind of government regulation that requires them to uh, think about the ethical implications of their technologies, and that actually affects their bottom line. For example, what kind of markets they're allowed to sell their tools in, then maybe they're going to start caring about normativity and value questions. So I don't know if our any words are going to convince them other than something like that.
Yeah, well, I think the only takeaway we can be sure of is there are quite a few reasons to stay up at night thinking about these things. But it's been great to have you, Professor Schnee. Thank you for being here.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.